You think Joel Goldsmith was just another spiritual teacher with nice ideas? You're about to discover why the most skeptical minds who dismissed him ended up becoming his most devoted students. What changed their perspective wasn't argument, it was direct experience of a power they couldn't deny. The critics said his teachings were too simple, too mystical, disconnected from reality. They wanted complexity, formulas, step-by-step methods. But Goldsmith taught something that threatened their entire intellectual framework, that healing and transformation don't come from human effort, but from spiritual realization. Here's what the skeptics missed. Goldsmith never asked anyone to believe him. He said, "Try this practice for 30 days, then judge." Those who accepted this challenge discovered something that shattered their doubts. They experienced tangible changes in health, relationships, and circumstances through pure consciousness work. The technique that converted critics into believers is called the practice of the presence. Not as religious ritual, but as actual conscious awareness of spiritual reality underlying all material appearance. This isn't faith. This is applied mysticism with measurable results. Before you judge this approach, understand what Goldsmith actually taught. He never promised instant miracles or magical thinking. He spoke of a gradual awakening to truth that already exists, waiting for your recognition. This is why his harshest critics became his greatest advocates after genuine practice. The practice begins with a radical premise. The problem you see isn't what needs fixing. Your health challenge, financial struggle, or relationship conflict is an effect, not a cause. Goldsmith taught that changing effects through human action alone brings temporary relief at best. True transformation requires shifting the consciousness that creates effects. Critics called this impractical escapism until they tested it themselves. A renowned physician who initially dismissed Goldsmith's work applied the practice during a medical crisis when conventional methods failed. Within weeks, his patient showed inexplicable improvement. This doctor spent the next 20 years studying spiritual healing. What converted him wasn't theory, but direct observation. When you stop fighting the material appearance and instead recognize the spiritual reality behind it, something shifts in the invisible realm. This shift then manifests as changed conditions in the visible world. The skeptic's main objection sounds reasonable. If spiritual consciousness solves everything, why doesn't everyone just think their problems away? Goldsmith anticipated this exact criticism. He explained that spiritual realization isn't positive thinking or mental manipulation. It's something entirely different. Positive thinking tries to change conditions through mental force. Spiritual realization recognizes that spiritual perfection already exists, complete and whole, regardless of material appearances. You're not creating something new. You're becoming aware of what has always been true. This distinction is everything. Here's the practice that changes minds. Sit quietly for 15 minutes daily. Don't pray for things to change. Don't visualize outcomes. Simply rest in this awareness. Behind this appearance, spiritual completeness exists now. Hold this knowing without effort or strain. Just recognize truth. Critics who actually practiced this for 30 consecutive days reported something unexpected. Their circumstances didn't always change immediately, but their relationship to circumstances transformed completely. Peace replaced anxiety. Clarity replaced confusion. Then, often gradually, external conditions began aligning with this inner shift. The most compelling evidence comes from those who had everything to lose by admitting Goldsmith was right. Successful business people who built empires through aggressive action discovered a completely different source of power. They found that conscious awareness of spiritual law accomplishes more than human scheming ever could. One corporate executive who ridiculed mysticism faced bankruptcy despite exhaustive human efforts to save his company. Desperate, he reluctantly tried Goldsmith's practice. For 3 months, he spent morning hours in conscious recognition of divine abundance as present reality, not future hope. His mind quieted. New insights emerged. Unexpected opportunities appeared. Within 6 months, his business stabilized through circumstances he never could have orchestrated humanly. He became one of Goldsmith's most articulate advocates, not from blind faith, but from reproducible experience. He discovered that spiritual consciousness doesn't replace intelligent action. It guides action from a higher dimension. This is why your mind will change if you genuinely test this teaching. Goldsmith never asked for belief, only honest experimentation. The practice of recognizing spiritual reality behind material appearance creates results that convert skeptics into students every single time they truly apply it. Let me share the story that silences most critics. Sarah was a psychologist who wrote academic papers debunking spiritual healing as placebo effect and wishful thinking. Her scientific training demanded measurable evidence, controlled studies, rational explanations. Goldsmith's teachings seemed like everything she professionally opposed. Then her daughter developed a condition that medical specialists said would require lifelong management. Sarah exhausted every conventional treatment, every specialist, every therapy protocol. Nothing provided lasting relief. Her daughter's quality of life deteriorated despite Sarah's desperate efforts and considerable resources. A colleague who knew of Sarah's situation quietly gave her Goldsmith's book, The Infinite Way. Sarah initially refused to read it, but one sleepless night, she opened it out of sheer desperation. What she read challenged every assumption she held about how reality works and what actually heals. Goldsmith explained that spiritual healing isn't about convincing God to fix problems. It's about recognizing that spiritual perfection exists as the only reality, while material discord is misperception. This wasn't positive thinking. It was a complete reorientation of consciousness from material to spiritual as the foundation of existence itself. Sarah decided to test the practice with scientific rigor. Every morning for 60 days, she sat in meditation, not praying for her daughter's healing, but recognizing spiritual wholeness as present truth. She didn't visualize health. She rested in awareness that perfection already existed beyond material appearance. The first 2 weeks brought no visible change, but Sarah noticed something unexpected in herself. The consuming anxiety that had dominated her thoughts began lifting. She felt genuine peace for the first time in months, not because circumstances improved, but because her consciousness shifted to a different foundation. Week 3 brought the first physical improvement. Small, easily dismissed as coincidence, but noticeable. Sarah continued the practice without attachment to outcomes, simply maintaining conscious awareness of spiritual reality. By week 7, her daughter showed improvement that medical records couldn't explain through treatment alone. Sarah didn't abandon medical care, she combined it with spiritual realization. But she observed something undeniable. As her own consciousness stabilized in recognition of spiritual truth, her daughter's condition improved in ways that transcended medical intervention. This wasn't correlation, this was causation operating from a dimension science doesn't yet measure. Today, Sarah integrates spiritual consciousness into her psychological practice. She doesn't abandon science, she expands it. Her professional papers now explore consciousness as causal factor in healing, backed by case studies that skeptical colleagues can't easily dismiss. She became what she once criticized. What converted her wasn't blind faith or desperate hope. It was reproducible results from systematic application of Goldsmith's principle. Consciousness precedes condition. Change consciousness, condition follows. This isn't magic. It's spiritual law operating with the same reliability as physical law. Another powerful testimony comes from Marcus, a financial analyst who measured everything through data and probability. He dismissed spiritual teachings as unmeasurable nonsense until a career crisis forced him to consider approaches beyond his rational toolkit. Reluctantly, he applied Goldsmith's practice of recognizing divine abundance as present reality. Marcus kept detailed journals documenting his practice and subsequent life changes. Over 4 months, he recorded shifts in career opportunities, financial circumstances, and professional relationships that probability analysis suggested were beyond chance. His analytical mind couldn't deny the correlation between consciousness work and material results. These stories share common elements: intelligent skeptics, genuine crisis, reluctant experimentation, and undeniable results. They didn't want Goldsmith to be right. Their worldviews, professional identities, and intellectual investments depended on material causation being primary. But direct experience overrode their resistance. The pattern repeats across hundreds of documented cases. Skeptics who actually practice Goldsmith's teachings for sustained periods report consciousness shifts, followed by circumstantial changes. This isn't anecdotal, it's observable pattern. medical professionals, scientists, business leaders, academics, all discovering that spiritual realization produces tangible results. What makes these testimonies credible is what the witnesses had to lose. They risked professional reputation, peer respect, and intellectual consistency by acknowledging spiritual causation. Yet the results were too significant, too consistent, too reproducible to deny. Truth demanded acknowledgement regardless of cost. This is why your mind will change if you genuinely test these teachings, not through argument or persuasion, but through direct experience that transcends intellectual debate. Consciousness creates conditions. Recognize spiritual reality. Watch material reality reflect it. This is verifiable mysticism. If these transformation stories inspire you to explore deeper, like this video to help others discover these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment. Which testimony resonated most powerfully with your own spiritual journey? Now, let's address the practical question every critic asks. How exactly do you practice this consciousness technique in daily life? Goldsmith provided specific guidance that removes mystical vagueness and creates reproducible method. This isn't abstract philosophy, it's applied spiritual science with clear steps. The foundation practice takes 15 to 30 minutes each morning. Sit quietly where you won't be disturbed. Don't begin with requests or problems. Start with simple recognition. Spiritual perfection exists now, complete and whole. Hold this awareness without mental effort. Let truth dawn in consciousness naturally. Critics say this sounds too simple to work. That's precisely why it works. Human effort based on material perception keeps you trapped in the problem level. Spiritual recognition shifts you to the solution level where problems don't exist. This isn't denial. It's elevation to truth that dissolves false appearance. As you maintain this practice daily, extend it into active life. When challenges arise during your day, pause internally. Don't react from material perception. Recognize spiritual reality present behind the appearance. This conscious pivot from material to spiritual becomes your moment-by-moment practice. Goldsmith taught a complementary technique for specific situations, the practice of non-power. When facing apparent opposition, whether difficult people, challenging circumstances, or health issues, recognize that material appearance has no power to create reality. Only spiritual truth holds creative power. This practice neutralizes the fear that gives material appearance its seeming power over you. When you recognize that the problem has no power to perpetuate itself, something in consciousness releases. The false appearance maintained by your fearful attention begins dissolving. Power returns to where it always existed, in spiritual truth. A business consultant who learned this technique applied it during hostile corporate negotiations. Instead of defending against perceived attacks, he silently recognized that only spiritual law held actual power. The aggressive dynamics dissolved within minutes. His opponents became collaborative partners, baffled by their own shift. He didn't manipulate anyone through mental tactics. He simply withdrew power from material appearance by recognizing spiritual reality as the only causative factor. This inner stance changed the entire energetic field of the negotiation. Consciousness shift preceded circumstantial shift, proving Goldsmith's principle in measurable business outcomes. Another powerful technique addresses the criticism that spiritual practice ignores practical action. Goldsmith taught conscious action versus anxious doing. After your morning practice of recognizing spiritual reality, go into your day's activities. But now your actions flow from spiritual consciousness rather than material anxiety. This distinction transforms everything. Anxious doing tries to force desired outcomes through human will. Conscious action allows spiritual guidance to direct each step. You remain fully engaged with practical responsibilities, but from a completely different inner foundation. The peace you cultivated in meditation now powers your activity. Critics who practice this report remarkable differences. Tasks that once felt overwhelming become manageable. Solutions appear for problems that previously seemed unsolvable. Resources arrive through unexpected channels. This isn't passivity. It's spiritually guided action that accomplishes far more than human striving alone. A surgeon who applied this approach described operating with unprecedented clarity and precision. His hands moved with confidence beyond his conscious control. He recognized this as spiritual intelligence flowing through his trained skills. His success rates improved measurably, documented in hospital records over 2 years of conscious practice. The final complementary technique involves conscious gratitude, but not as most people practice it. Goldsmith taught gratitude not for things received, but recognition of spiritual completeness already present. You're grateful because perfection exists now, not because future desires might manifest. This practice short-circuits the consciousness of lack that blocks demonstration. When you're grateful for present spiritual perfection, you're acknowledging its reality. This acknowledgement is the consciousness that allows spiritual reality to manifest as material experience. Gratitude becomes recognition. Recognition becomes realization. Realization becomes demonstration. These complementary techniques work together. Morning recognition of spiritual truth, moment-by-moment awareness of non-power and material appearance, conscious action from spiritual guidance, and continuous gratitude for present perfection. Practiced consistently, they create consciousness that skeptics can't argue with because results speak louder than words. The beauty of these techniques is their accessibility. No special training required, no mystical experiences necessary, just honest, consistent practice of recognizing spiritual reality as primary truth. Do this for 90 days, document your results, then decide if Goldsmith's teachings deserve criticism or celebration. Let's address the obstacles that stop most people from succeeding with these practices. The first barrier is the demand for immediate proof. Modern minds want instant validation, but consciousness transformation follows natural timing. Seeds grow at their own pace regardless of your impatience. Spiritual unfoldment operates similarly. Goldsmith warned against this obstacle directly. He said 3 to 6 months of consistent practice typically precedes obvious external changes. Most people quit after 2 weeks when dramatic miracles don't appear. They declare the teaching ineffective without completing the actual experiment. This premature judgment prevents the very results they seek. A teacher who struggled with this pattern finally committed to 6 months of practice regardless of visible outcomes. The first month brought only frustration. The second month offered subtle inner shifts, but no external changes. By month 3, she noticed small improvements easily dismissed as coincidence. Month 4 brought undeniable changes. Month 5 produced results she couldn't logically explain. By month 6, her entire life circumstances had transformed in ways she'd stopped hoping for. She realized that her previous attempts failed because she judged the process before it completed its work in consciousness. The second major obstacle is inconsistent practice. People meditate when inspired but skip practice when busy or discouraged. This sporadic approach never builds the consciousness momentum that produces results. Goldsmith compared it to taking medication occasionally, then wondering why you're not healing. Spiritual law requires the same consistency as physical law. You can't plant seeds randomly, water sporadically, then blame the seeds when nothing grows. Consciousness cultivation demands daily attention, especially during periods when you see no evidence of progress. The invisible work in consciousness precedes visible manifestation. An entrepreneur who failed repeatedly with spiritual practices finally recognized this pattern in himself. He treated spiritual work like optional self-help rather than essential daily practice. When he committed to 30 consecutive days without missing a single morning meditation, breakthrough occurred on day 28. He documented this carefully because his analytical mind needed proof. The first 27 days showed minimal external change. Day 28 brought a business opportunity that solved his financial crisis completely. He realized that consciousness was building invisibly until reaching critical mass that erupted into material demonstration. The third obstacle is practicing while secretly doubting. You go through the motions of recognizing spiritual reality while your deeper mind whispers, "This won't work." This divided consciousness neutralizes your practice. Goldsmith taught that spiritual realization requires wholehearted recognition, not intellectual agreement mixed with emotional skepticism. This doesn't mean forcing yourself to believe what seems impossible. It means being honest about your doubts while choosing to practice anyway. Say to yourself, "I don't fully believe this yet, but I commit to practicing as if spiritual reality is true for 90 days, then evaluating results honestly." This approach respects your skepticism while creating space for genuine experience to develop. Many of Goldsmith's most devoted students began exactly this way. They practiced despite doubts, allowing experience to gradually dissolve skepticism through undeniable results. Faith grew from evidence, not before it. A scientist who applied this honest approach documented her journey. She rated her belief level daily on a scale of 1 to 10. Started at 3. By day 60, genuine experiences had raised it to 8. By day 90, measurable life changes convinced her completely. Doubt dissolved in the face of reproducible results. The fourth obstacle is misunderstanding what spiritual realization means. People think it requires feeling peaceful, having mystical visions, or experiencing emotional highs. When these don't come, they assume they're failing. But Goldsmith taught that realization is quiet recognition of truth, not emotional experience or psychic phenomena. You recognize spiritual reality the same way you recognize any truth. When someone tells you 2 + 2 = 4, you recognize this truth without emotional fireworks or mystical sensations. Spiritual realization works identically. You quietly recognize, spiritual perfection exists now. This simple recognition is the realization that changes everything. Stop waiting for dramatic spiritual experiences to validate your practice. The consciousness shift is often subtle, almost unnoticeable in the moment. You realize later that your thinking has changed, your reactions have shifted, your peace has deepened. These quiet transformations in consciousness precede obvious life changes. A nurse who struggled with this finally understood when her colleague pointed out changes she hadn't noticed in herself. Her anxiety around difficult patients had disappeared. Her effectiveness had increased. Her home life had improved. The transformation happened so naturally she missed it while waiting for dramatic spiritual breakthrough. If these obstacle-dissolving insights empower your practice, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual techniques, and comment. Which barrier are you now ready to overcome in your consciousness journey? Now let's explore advanced integration of these practices into complex modern life. Critics often claim spiritual teachings work only for people with simple lives, plenty of time, and few responsibilities. But Goldsmith's most successful students were busy professionals facing intense demands. They proved consciousness work enhances, rather than escapes, worldly effectiveness. The key is portable practice. You don't need hours of meditation when 30 minutes daily builds sufficient consciousness foundation. Throughout your busy day, practice micro moments of spiritual recognition. Waiting at traffic lights, between meetings, standing in lines, pause internally. Recognize spiritual reality present now. These seconds accumulate into consciousness shift. A trial attorney with crushing caseload and constant deadline pressure integrated practice this way. Morning meditation anchored her day. Brief recognition moments throughout maintained spiritual consciousness amid chaos. Evening reflection processed the day through spiritual lens. Within months, her effectiveness increased while her stress decreased. She won cases that seemed impossible because her consciousness clarity revealed strategies her anxious mind had missed. Opposing counsel commented on her unusual calm under pressure. Clients felt reassured by her confidence. Her career advanced as her spiritual practice deepened. The two didn't conflict. They synergized. Advanced practice involves maintaining spiritual recognition during active challenges, not just peaceful meditation. When crisis hits, untrained consciousness reverts to material panic. Trained consciousness pivots immediately to spiritual recognition. What is the truth here? What spiritual reality exists behind this appearance? This instant pivot during difficulty is mastery-level practice. It doesn't come naturally or easily. It develops through months of consistent foundational practice that builds new neural pathways and consciousness patterns. But once established, this ability transforms how you move through every challenge. A physician practiced this during medical emergencies. When critical situations arose, she maintained split awareness, handling medical protocols expertly while simultaneously recognizing spiritual perfection as underlying truth. She noticed that patients with seemingly identical conditions responded differently based on her consciousness state during treatment. When she maintained spiritual recognition, despite medical crisis, outcomes improved beyond statistical expectation. When she slipped into pure medical anxiety, outcomes matched predictable statistics. This pattern repeated too consistently to dismiss. Her consciousness directly influenced healing outcomes in measurable, documentable ways. Another advanced application involves practicing for others without their knowledge or cooperation. Critics say if consciousness truly creates conditions, you should be able to help anyone regardless of their awareness. Goldsmith addressed this directly. You can hold truth for another, but you can't make them demonstrate it. Here's how it works. When someone you care about faces difficulty, don't pray for God to fix their problem. Instead, recognize spiritual truth about them. This person is spiritual being, complete and whole right now. This appearance of lack or discord isn't truth. Hold this recognition without telling them, without trying to convince them. A mother practiced this for her adult son who battled addiction. She stopped pleading with him to change, stopped praying desperately for divine intervention. Instead, she daily recognized his spiritual perfection as present reality, regardless of his material behavior. She released him to his own journey while holding truth in consciousness. After 8 months, he entered recovery voluntarily through circumstances no one could have orchestrated. He later told her he felt supported in a way he couldn't explain, as if invisible strength carried him when he had none himself. Her consciousness work for him created spiritual space for his own healing to unfold naturally. The ultimate advanced practice is maintaining spiritual consciousness as your permanent perspective, not just during meditation or when you remember. You live, work, relate, and create from spiritual foundation continuously. Material concerns get handled practically, but never from material consciousness as primary reality. This doesn't make you detached or ineffective. It makes you more present, more capable, more genuinely helpful to others. You bring spiritual dimension into every interaction and activity. People feel it without naming it. Your presence alone begins shifting consciousness around you because you're established in truth. Goldsmith lived this way. People reported that being near him changed their consciousness without words exchanged. His established spiritual realization created a field that elevated everyone in proximity. This wasn't mystical magic, it was consciousness law. Strong spiritual recognition impacts surrounding consciousness fields naturally. You develop this through years of consistent practice, not weeks or months. But the journey itself transforms every aspect of your life progressively. Each day of practice builds consciousness momentum. Each challenge faced from spiritual perspective strengthens your realization. Eventually, spiritual consciousness becomes your natural state. Material consciousness, the temporary illusion it always was. We've reached the threshold of total transformation, the complete reorientation from material to spiritual as your primary reality. This is where criticism ends because you've become living proof of what you once doubted. Your life demonstrates what arguments never could. Critics fall silent before undeniable demonstration. The transformed life doesn't mean problem-free existence. It means problems no longer define you or control your consciousness. Challenges arise, you recognize spiritual truth, solutions appear, life flows forward. You're not fighting reality. You're aligned with reality at its spiritual foundation. This alignment is effortless power. People notice the change without understanding its source. They comment on your peace during crisis, your clarity under pressure, your effectiveness without visible stress. They ask what's different about you. Your answer is simple. I learned to recognize what's real. You don't preach, you demonstrate. A former critic who became devoted student said it best. I spent 20 years arguing against spiritual causation using impressive intellectual arguments. Then I practiced for 6 months and experienced what argument could never provide. Now I'm no longer interested in defending my old position. I'm living from truth. The transformation reaches into every life dimension. Health improves not through obsessive focus on symptoms, but through consciousness established in spiritual wholeness. Relationships deepen as you recognize spiritual identity in yourself and others beneath personality conflicts. Work becomes fulfilling as you bring spiritual consciousness into daily activities. Financial circumstances shift as you release anxiety-driven striving and allow spiritual law to govern supply. You take intelligent action, but from consciousness of abundance rather than fear of lack. Resources appear through channels you never could have engineered through human planning alone. Most remarkably, inner peace becomes your default state. Not because life becomes problem-free, but because your consciousness rests in spiritual foundation, unshaken by material fluctuations. Joy arises independently of circumstances. Love flows naturally toward all beings. This is the transformation that converts critics into believers. A businessman who initially dismissed these teachings as impractical mysticism now teaches them to his company leadership. He watched spiritual practice transform not just his personal life, but his entire organization. Culture shifted from competitive anxiety to collaborative creativity. Results improved as stress decreased. Consciousness principles proved more practical than material methods. Your new perspective recognizes that everything Goldsmith taught was provable through practice, not provable through argument. The critics who never genuinely practiced remained critics. The critics who honestly tested the teachings became teachers. The difference wasn't intellectual capacity. It was willingness to experiment beyond conceptual debate. This is why your mind has changed if you've followed this message sincerely. You recognize now that spiritual consciousness isn't religious dogma or wishful thinking. It's practical power accessible through specific practices that produce reproducible results. The mystics weren't dreamers. They were scientists exploring consciousness dimensions that material science ignores. You understand now that criticism without practice is meaningless. Only direct experience validates or invalidates spiritual teachings. Goldsmith never asked anyone to believe without testing. He simply said, practice consistently for sufficient time, observe results honestly, then draw your conclusions. Those who accepted this challenge discovered truth. Your journey from skepticism to understanding mirrors countless others who walked this path before you. Each person who genuinely practices adds their demonstration to the mounting evidence that consciousness is causal, spiritual reality is primary, and material appearance is effect rather than cause. The final transformation is becoming someone who helps others discover what you've found. Not through argument or persuasion, but through embodiment and invitation. Your changed life raises questions in others. Your peace amid chaos makes them curious. Your effectiveness without visible stress makes them wonder what you know that they don't. When they ask, you share simply. Recognize spiritual reality as primary truth. Practice this recognition consistently. Watch your life transform naturally. You don't convince, you invite. You don't debate, you demonstrate. Your greatest teaching is your transformed consciousness manifesting as changed circumstances. This is how spiritual truth spreads, not through intellectual conquest, but through individual demonstration, multiplying across human consciousness. Each person who genuinely practices becomes living proof. Each transformed life inspires others to test the teachings themselves. Truth validates itself through reproducible results. You came to this message as a critic or skeptic, questioning if Joel Goldsmith's teachings held genuine value or just sounded appealing. Now you know. The teachings work for anyone who practices consistently with honesty and patience. The transformation is real, the power is accessible, and the results speak for themselves in life after transformed life. If your consciousness and perspective have genuinely expanded through these teachings, like this video to help others discover this transformative path. Subscribe for continued spiritual wisdom, and comment, I am transformed, to confirm your shift from criticism to understanding.